There comes a moment in life when explaining yourself starts to feel like self-betrayal. When every word you offer becomes a negotiation for permission to exist as you are. And the more you explain, the more invisible you feel. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They think silence means weakness. They think cutting people off without explanation is cruelty. They think closure must be verbal, logical, polite. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Some endings do not require discussion. Some boundaries do not need justification. And some connections must be severed quietly, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because growth is not loud, healing is not performative, and transformation rarely asks for approval. What you are about to hear is not advice, it is a mirror. And once you see yourself in it, you will never explain yourself the same way again. Most people believe that cutting someone off requires a dramatic explanation, a confrontation, a final message carefully crafted to sound reasonable, fair, and mature. A moment where you sit across from someone, emotion exposed, and try to make them understand why you are leaving. But this belief does not come from wisdom, it comes from conditioning. From a very young age, we are taught that our inner world must be approved before it is allowed to exist. As children, we explain ourselves to survive. We justify our emotions to avoid punishment, rejection, or withdrawal of love. We learn, slowly and painfully, that being understood feels safer than being authentic. So we adapt, we soften our truth, we over-explain our feelings. We negotiate our boundaries instead of enforcing them. And this pattern follows us into adulthood, disguised as communication and emotional maturity. But adulthood demands something far more uncomfortable. It demands that we stop seeking permission to be ourselves. True maturity is not loud, it does not argue, it does not plead its case. It chooses clarity over approval. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not avoidance. It is discernment. It is the recognition that not everyone who had access to you deserves continued explanation. Some people are not confused, they are invested in misunderstanding you. Because misunderstanding allows them to maintain control. When you explain yourself to such people, you do not create clarity. You create loopholes. Every explanation becomes a debate. Every justification becomes an invitation for manipulation. Your truth is no longer yours. It is something to be negotiated, dissected, and possibly dismissed. Silence closes that door, not out of cruelty, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. You do not owe explanations to everyone who once occupied space in your life. You owe honesty to yourself. And sometimes honesty does not speak, it withdraws. Clarity often arrives not when you say more, but when you stop talking long enough to hear yourself again. In that quiet, you begin to notice how much energy was spent maintaining connections that required constant self-betrayal. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the presence of inner alignment. And when alignment is restored, many relationships naturally fall away. Without explanation, without ceremony, without noise. That is not failure, that is growth. There are people who only show up when something is wrong. When your life is unstable. When you are emotionally raw, confused, or breaking apart. They are intensely present during your pain, but strangely absent during your peace. At first, this feels like loyalty. They listened when no one else did. They stayed when things were dark. They knew you at your lowest. But over time, something unsettling reveals itself. They are not attached to your healing. They are attached to your suffering. These relationships are built on emotional intensity rather than emotional safety. They thrive on chaos, urgency, and unresolved wounds. When your life begins to stabilize, when you grow calmer, clearer, more grounded, they lose interest. Or worse, they begin to provoke you subtly or overtly, to return to the version of yourself they recognize. This is how trauma bonds form. Your nervous system confuses familiarity with safety. The emotional highs and lows feel like connection, even though your body is constantly exhausted. You mistake volatility for intimacy. Your system becomes addicted to the very dynamic that drains you, because it feels known. And when you try to leave, guilt appears. They were there for me. They saw me at my worst. I owe them an explanation. But here is the uncomfortable truth. People who bond with you through crisis often resist your healing, because your healing threatens the relationship itself. Explaining your exit to such people is rarely productive. They are not listening to understand. They are listening to regain access. They will frame your growth as abandonment, your boundaries as betrayal, your silence as cruelty. And when you stop responding, they will say, "You've changed." They are right. You have changed in the most important way possible. You are no longer available as emotional fuel. You are no longer willing to bleed just to feel connected. You are choosing regulation over chaos, peace over intensity, self-respect over familiarity. And this shift does not require explanation, because any explanation you give will be filtered through their need to keep the bond alive, even if it costs you your well-being. Walking away quietly is not heartless. It is the moment you stop confusing pain with love. Some relationships only exist to mirror wounds, not to heal them. And when the wound begins to close, the relationship naturally dissolves. You do not need to explain why you are done being consumed. Your silence already says enough. The first time someone crosses your boundary, it may truly be ignorance. They did not know. They misread you. They were clumsy with your limits. In healthy relationships, that first violation becomes a moment of learning. Respect follows awareness. The second time is different. The second time is information. It reveals how seriously your words are taken, how much weight your comfort holds in their internal hierarchy. It shows whether your boundary was heard or merely tolerated. The third time is no longer accidental. It is a choice. People who repeatedly violate your boundaries are not confused. They are observing, testing, measuring how much of yourself you are willing to abandon to keep the connection intact. They push gently at first, then harder, watching how quickly you fold, how much you explain, how often you forgive without change. Boundaries threaten people who benefit from your self-erasure. When you try to explain your limits to someone who gains from ignoring them, you enter an endless loop. Each explanation becomes a debate. Each clarification becomes a negotiation. You begin defending your right to comfort as if it were a controversial opinion rather than a basic human need. Over time, something subtle but dangerous happens. You stop enforcing boundaries and start justifying them. You begin apologizing for your own limits. You feel guilty for needing space, consistency, or respect. This is how people lose themselves slowly. Not through dramatic betrayal, but through repeated quiet concessions. At some point, clarity arrives. You realize that words are no longer working. Not because you are failing to communicate, but because communication is being used against you. And this is where silence becomes the boundary. You stop answering immediately. You stop explaining your decisions. You stop offering unlimited access to your time, energy, and emotions, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because something in you has finally woken up. You understand that boundaries do not need to be loud to be firm. They do not need to be aggressive to be final. Sometimes the most powerful boundary is simply withdrawal, calm, quiet, non-negotiable. People who respected you will adjust. People who benefited from crossing your boundaries will react. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of being difficult, but what they are truly responding to is the loss of control. Boundaries enforced quietly cannot be argued with. They cannot be twisted. They cannot be manipulated. They simply exist, and when you stop explaining them, you stop giving others the illusion that they have a say. This is the most painful separation you will ever make, because it is internal. It is the version of you that over-explains everything, that rehearses conversations in their head late at night, that anticipates misunderstandings and preemptively softens the truth. This version fears being seen as selfish, harsh, or wrong. It would rather be exhausted than misunderstood. It would rather betray itself than risk rejection. This part of you was not born flawed. It was created in survival. It learned early that approval meant safety, that being liked meant belonging, that explaining yourself could reduce conflict, danger, or abandonment. Over time, this strategy became automatic. You learned to perform clarity, kindness, and reasonableness, even when it cost you authenticity. But survival strategies are not meant to last forever. What once protected you now confines you. You cannot heal while auditioning for acceptance. You cannot evolve while needing permission. You cannot become whole while outsourcing your worth. This version of you keeps asking, do they understand me? Do they approve? Did I explain that well enough? And as long as those questions dominate your inner world, your center of gravity remains external. Letting go of this version feels terrifying at first. It feels like stepping into silence without armor. You worry you will be misjudged, misread, dismissed. And you will be, by people who relied on your self-explanation to maintain comfort. But something remarkable happens when you stop explaining yourself. Your nervous system relaxes. Your intuition strengthens. Your words become fewer and heavier. You no longer speak to be liked. You speak when there is truth to share. And slowly, the compulsive need to be validated dissolves, not through force, but through integration. You realize you no longer need to announce who you are becoming. You allow it to unfold quietly. This is not arrogance. This is not emotional withdrawal. This is maturity. You are no longer asking the world to confirm your reality. You are inhabiting it. Every conversation you participate in leaves a residue. It subtly shapes your emotional state, your worldview, your sense of what is normal. Some conversations expand you. They sharpen your thinking, deepen your compassion, and leave you feeling more alive. Others quietly suffocate you. Gossip that feeds on judgment, chronic negativity disguised as realism, endless complaints with no responsibility or intention to change. These conversations do not just pass time, They condition the psyche. What you repeatedly engage with becomes the architecture of your inner world. If your daily dialogue is saturated with bitterness, resentment, and trivial conflict, your mind slowly reorganizes around those frequencies. You become smaller without realizing it. And the most dangerous part, these conversations feel normal. They are socially acceptable. They are familiar. They require no growth. When you begin to withdraw from them, people notice. Your silence feels unsettling to those who rely on noise to avoid introspection. Your refusal to engage is interpreted as superiority, distance, or rejection. But peace often requires disengagement. You do not owe explanations for protecting your mental environment. You are allowed to step back from conversations that erode your clarity, even if they are popular, common, or socially rewarded. Silence here is not disengagement from people. It is engagement with yourself. When you stop feeding conversations that shrink you, your inner world begins to expand naturally. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions settle. You become more selective, not because you are closed, but because you are conscious. Not every conversation deserves your presence. Not every voice deserves space in your mind. Not every exchange is worth your energy. And choosing silence in these moments is not avoidance. It is self-respect. Some people do not love you. They love the role you play in their life. They love the version of you that is predictable, accommodating, and familiar. The version that stays the same so they do not have to adjust, reflect, or grow. They love who you are, as long as you remain frozen in time. At first, this feels like acceptance. They praise your consistency. They admire how grounded you are. But the moment you begin to shift, when your values sharpen, when your boundaries strengthen, when your identity deepens, their affection turns conditional. They become uncomfortable. They resist your growth. They subtly punish your evolution. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because your transformation destabilizes the image they built of you in their mind. You were never meant to outgrow the role they assigned you. These people often respond to your growth with confusion or criticism. They say you are becoming distant, different, cold, or selfish. What they really mean is that you are no longer accessible in the way they were accustomed to. Explaining yourself to them rarely helps. They are not trying to understand who you are becoming. They are trying to preserve who you used to be. And every explanation you offer becomes an attempt to shrink yourself back into a shape that feels familiar to them. Outgrowing these relationships is deeply painful because they often involve history, shared memories, loyalty, time. You may feel guilt for changing, as if evolution were a betrayal. But growth is not disloyalty. It is life moving forward. When someone only loves the version of you that never changes, they are not in relationship with your soul. They are in relationship with their comfort. And you cannot sacrifice your becoming to preserve someone else's sense of stability. Silence becomes necessary here, not as rejection, but as protection. You allow distance to form so you can hear yourself again, unfiltered by expectations. You let the relationship fade rather than forcing yourself to explain a transformation they are unwilling to accept. Some people are meant to walk with you only through certain seasons. Their inability to follow you forward does not make them bad. It simply means the path has diverged, and you are allowed to keep walking. Not all harm is loud. Some of it is chronic and quiet. There are environments that never feel dramatic enough to leave, yet slowly drain the life from you. Places where your body is always slightly tense, where your nervous system never fully relaxes, where you are constantly alert, guarded, or bracing for impact. You may not be abused there, you may not be attacked, but you are never at ease. These environments keep you in survival mode. Over time, survival becomes your personality. You become reactive instead of reflective. You shrink your needs to avoid conflict. You silence your intuition to maintain peace. You call this being strong, but your body knows the truth. It is exhausted. Leaving such environments often triggers doubt. You wonder if you are being dramatic, ungrateful, weak. You try to justify staying by minimizing your discomfort. But the body does not lie. If your energy collapses in a place, if your creativity dies there, if your sense of self fades in that environment, it is not your imagination. Explaining your departure from such spaces is rarely useful. People who thrive in survival-based systems often normalize suffering. They call it discipline, loyalty, or resilience. Your need for peace threatens the identity they built around endurance. Distance becomes the only honest response. Sometimes healing does not begin with insight or confrontation. It begins with removal, with leaving the room, with stepping into a space where your nervous system can finally exhale. You do not owe explanations for choosing environments that allow you to breathe. Your body has already explained enough. We are taught that closure comes from conversations, from apologies, from final explanations that tie everything together neatly. So we wait, we reach out, We reopen wounds in the hope that one more discussion will finally bring peace. But true closure does not come from others. It comes from the moment you stop needing them to understand. The need for external closure keeps you psychologically tethered to the past. It keeps the wound open under the illusion of resolution. You relive the story again and again, hoping the ending will change. But some people will never acknowledge the harm they caused. Some will never see you clearly. Some will never offer the validation you deserve. And waiting for that moment keeps you stuck. Not all harm announces itself. Some of it whispers. Some of it settles into your body so slowly that you stop noticing how tense you've become. There are environments that never feel dramatic enough to justify leaving. No obvious abuse, no clear villain, no single moment you can point to and say, "This is why I left." And yet, every time you enter these spaces, something inside you tightens. Your shoulders rise, your breath shortens, your thoughts race slightly faster, as if your body is preparing for something it cannot name. You are not imagining this. Your nervous system is responding to a threat that does not need to be loud to be real. In these environments, you are always on guard, always reading the room, always calculating the safest way to speak, act, or exist. You become hyper-aware of tone, timing, and reaction. You learn how to disappear just enough to avoid conflict, yet remain present enough to survive. Over time, this state stops feeling temporary. It becomes normal. Survival mode rewires you. It turns your attention outward instead of inward. You become reactive instead of reflective. You stop asking what you want and start asking what will cause the least disruption. You call this maturity. You call this strength. You call this handling things. But your body calls it exhaustion. In survival-based environments, your intuition gets quieter, your creativity dulls, your capacity for joy narrows. You may function well, efficient, reliable, productive, but something essential begins to fade. You feel it when you are alone, in moments of silence, when the adrenaline drops and the emptiness surfaces. Leaving such environments is rarely easy, because they train you to doubt yourself. You question whether you are being dramatic, whether you are too sensitive, whether you should be grateful instead of uncomfortable. You minimize your own distress because others seem to tolerate the same conditions. You tell yourself that endurance is virtue, that discomfort builds character. But there is a difference between challenge and chronic stress. Challenge strengthens you. Chronic stress erodes you. And your body knows the difference long before your mind catches up. If your energy collapses in a place, if your creativity dies there, if your sense of self slowly dissolves, that is not weakness. That is wisdom signaling that something is wrong. Explaining your departure from such spaces often leads nowhere. People who thrive in survival-based systems normalize suffering because it validates their own endurance. They label pain as discipline, silence as loyalty, suppression as resilience. Your desire for peace feels threatening to the identity they built around surviving without complaint. So they minimize your experience. They rationalize your discomfort. They frame your leaving as failure. Distance becomes the only honest response. Sometimes healing does not begin with insight therapy or confrontation. Sometimes it begins with removal, with leaving the room, with stepping into a space where your nervous system can finally exhale without permission. You do not owe explanations for choosing environments that allow you to breathe. Your body has already explained enough. Closure is one of the most romanticized myths in emotional life. We are taught that healing requires a final conversation, a moment of mutual understanding, an apology that arrives neatly wrapped in remorse and accountability. We are told that once the other person understands, we will finally feel free. So we wait. We replay conversations that never happened. We draft messages we never send, or send and regret. We reopen wounds in the hope that one more explanation will finally bring peace. But true closure does not come from others. It comes from the moment you stop needing them to understand. The need for external closure keeps you psychologically tethered to the past. It binds your present emotional state to someone else's capacity for insight, empathy, or responsibility. As long as you need their acknowledgement, they remain central to your inner world, even in absence. This is why unresolved relationships feel heavy, not because they are unfinished, but because you are still carrying the hope that they will one day validate your reality. But some people will never acknowledge the harm they caused. Some will never see you clearly. Some will never offer the apology you deserved, not because you are wrong, but because they are unable. Waiting for closure from such people keeps the wound open. It turns healing into negotiation. It traps your energy in endless rumination, revisiting the same story with the same unanswered questions. Closure does not require agreement. It does not require confession. It does not require the other person's participation. Closure happens internally when you accept that your experience is valid even if it is never confirmed. when you stop seeking permission to let go. When you decide that understanding is not a prerequisite for release, you do not need one last conversation. You need one final decision. The decision to stop carrying what is no longer yours. This decision is quiet. It does not come with fireworks or dramatic relief. At first, it feels unsettling, like stepping into an empty space where answers used to be, but slowly something softens. The mind grows quieter, the body relaxes, the emotional charge begins to fade. You reclaim energy that was trapped in unfinished conversations. You stop rehearsing explanations for people who are no longer present. You stop trying to resolve the past from inside the present. This is not denial. It is acceptance. Acceptance that some stories do not end with clarity. Acceptance that not every wound receives acknowledgement. Acceptance that your healing does not require their understanding. When you allow the story to end without a final chapter written by someone else, freedom begins, not loudly but gently, like a weight slowly lifting, like breath returning to your chest, and in that quiet release, you choose yourself. Closure happens internally when you accept that understanding is not required for release, that an apology is not necessary for healing, that your experience is valid, even if it is never confirmed. You do not need one last conversation. You need one final decision. The decision to stop carrying what is no longer yours. When you let go of the need for closure from others, something softens inside you. The mind quiets, the body relaxes. You reclaim energy that was trapped in unfinished conversations. This is not denial. It is acceptance. You allow the story to end without a final chapter written by someone else. And in that acceptance, freedom begins. One day, without drama or announcement, you will notice something has changed. You no longer feel the urge to explain. You no longer rehearse conversations that never happen. You no longer chase understanding from people who were never listening. Your silence will not be empty. It will be full of clarity. You will have cut away what drained you, not out of anger, but out of love for the life growing inside you. And though some people will not understand your absence, you will finally understand your presence. There is grief in this process, real grief. You will mourn the versions of yourself that tried so hard to be accepted. You will feel the weight of endings that were never spoken. But there is also relief, a deep, quiet relief that comes from no longer abandoning yourself. And in that stillness, something sacred happens. You come home to yourself.